The Dore Lectures on Mental Science. By Thomas Troward. Lecture 2. Individuality. Part 1 of 2. Individuality is the necessary complement of the Universal Spirit, which was the subject of our consideration last Sunday. The whole problem of life consists in finding the true relation of the individual to the Universal Originating Spirit, and the first step towards ascertaining this is to realize what the Universal Spirit must be in itself. We have already done this to some extent, and the conclusions we have arrived at are, that the essence of the Spirit is life, love, and beauty. That its motive, or primary moving impulse, is to express the life, love and beauty which it feels itself to be. That the universal cannot act on the plane of the particular except by becoming the particular, that is by expression through the individual. If these three axioms are clearly grasped, we have got a solid foundation from which to start our consideration of the subject for today. The first question that naturally presents itself is, if these things be so, why does not every individual express the life, love, and beauty of the Universal Spirit? The answer to this question is to be found in the law of consciousness. We cannot be conscious of anything except by realizing a certain relation between it and ourselves. It must affect us in some way, otherwise we are not conscious of its existence, and according to the way in which it affects us we recognize ourselves as standing related to it. It is this self-recognition on our own part carried out to the sum total of all our relations, whether spiritual, intellectual, or physical, that constitutes our realization of life. On this principle, then, for the realization of its own livingness, the production of centers of life, through its relation to which this conscious realization can be attained, becomes a necessity for the originating mind. Then it follows that this realization can only be complete where the individual has perfect liberty to withhold it, for otherwise no true realization could have taken place. For instance, let us consider the working of love. Love must be spontaneous, or it has no existence at all. We cannot imagine such a thing as mechanically induced love. But anything which is formed so as to automatically produce an effect without any volition of its own, is nothing but a piece of mechanism. Hence, if the originating mind is to realize the reality of love, it can only be by relation to some being which has the power to withhold love. The same applies to the realization of all the other modes of livingness, so that it is only in proportion, as the individual life is an independent center of action, with the option of acting either positively or negatively, that any real life has been produced at all. The further the created thing is from being a merely mechanical arrangement, the higher is the grade of creation. The solar system is a perfect work of mechanical creation, but to constitute centers which can reciprocate the highest nature of the divine mind, requires not a mechanism, however perfect, but a mental center which is, in itself, an independent source of action. Hence by the requirements of the case man should be capable of placing himself either in a positive or a negative relation to the parent mind, from which he originates, otherwise he would be nothing more than a clockwork figure. And this necessity of the case, then, we find the reason why the life, love, and beauty of the Spirit are not visibly reproduced in every human being. They are reproduced in the world of nature, so far as a mechanical and automatic action can represent them, but their perfect reproduction can only take place on the basis of a liberty akin to that of the originating Spirit itself, which therefore implies the liberty of negation as well as of affirmation. Why, then, does the individual make a negative choice? Because he does not understand the law of his own individuality, and believes it to be a law of limitation, instead of a law of liberty. He does not expect to find the starting point of the creative process reproduced within himself, and so he looks to the mechanical side of things for the basis of his reasoning about life. Consequently, his reasoning lands him in the conclusion that life is limited, because he has assumed limitation in his premises, and so logically cannot escape from it in his conclusion. Then he thinks that this is the law and so ridicules the idea of transcending it. He points to the sequence of cause and effect, by which death, disease, and disaster hold their sway over the individual, and says that sequence is law. And he is perfectly right so far as he goes, it is a law, but not the law. When we have only reached this stage of comprehension, we have yet to learn that a higher law can include a lower one so completely as entirely to swallow it up. The fallacy involved in this negative argument is the assumption that the law of limitation is essential in all grades of being. It is the fallacy of the old shipbuilders as to the impossibility of building iron ships. What is required is to get at the principle which is at the back of the law in its affirmative working, and specialize it under higher conditions than are spontaneously presented by nature, and this can only be done by the introduction of the personal element, that is to say an individual intelligence capable of comprehending the principle. The question, then, is, what is the principle by which we came into being? And this is only a personal application of the general question, how did anything come into being? Now, as I pointed out in the preceding article, the ultimate deduction from physical science is that the originating movement takes place in the universal mind, and is analogous to that of our own imagination, and as we have just seen, the perfect ideal can only be that of a being capable of reciprocating all the qualities of the originating mind. Consequently man, in his inmost nature, is the product of the divine mind imaging forth an image of itself on the plane of the relative as the complementary to its own sphere of the absolute. If we will therefore go to the inmost principle in ourselves, which philosophy and scripture alike declare to be made in the image and likeness of God, instead of to the outer vehicles which it externalizes as instruments through which to function on the various planes of being, we shall find that we have reached a principle in ourselves which stands in loco dei towards all our vehicles and also towards our environment. It is above them all, and creates them, however unaware we may be of the fact, and relatively to them it occupies the place of first cause. The recognition of this is the discovery of our own relation to the whole world of the relative. On the other hand, this must not lead us into the mistake of supposing that there is nothing higher, for, as we have already seen, this inmost principle or ego is itself the effect of an antecedent cause, for it proceeds from the imaging process in the divine mind. We thus find ourselves holding an intermediate position between true first cause, on the one hand, and the world of secondary causes on the other, and in order to understand the nature of this position, we must fall back on the axiom that the universal can only work on the plane of the particular through the individual. Then we see that the function of the individual is to differentiate the undistributed flow of the universal into suitable directions for starting different trains of secondary causation. Lecture 2. Individuality. End of Part 1 of 2. Need help understanding Troward's teachings? The Thomas Troward lectures contain very deep and powerful information, but to get the most out of them, require repeated listening and in-depth study. Troward had only one personal student, Genevieve Behrend, and her book Your Invisible Power distills the essence of Troward's lectures in a concise and easy-to-understand format. For many, this is a much preferred way to learn Troward's teachings. Click the link below this video to visit yourinvisiblepower.us and learn more about Genevieve Behrend's recently updated book.